Hello, everybody. Welcome or thank you for joining us tonight, and welcome to the Natural Heritage Study Open House number 2. Just going to give it a moment for attendees to file in, and then we'll get started. Give it about 30 or 40 seconds, and then we'll get underway. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Okay, so I think we'll get started then. My name is Autumn Hume. I'm a communications officer and engagement advisor with the City of Kingston. I support city project teams as they do public engagement. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us here tonight. I'm just going to run through a couple intro slides, and then we're going to toss it over to a presentation, and then we'll get into a question and answer period. So on your screen right now, you should see the guidelines for participation. I'm just going to leave these up here for about 30 seconds or so. If you have attended a City of Kingston engagement session in the past, these should look pretty familiar. We just ask that participants be respectful and be open to ideas and adhere to the process that's been established. We'll get into that process in the next slide. Thanks. So there is a Q&A portion. It will follow the short presentation that we have. When we get to the Q&A, you can ask questions through the Q&A tool. If you look at the bottom of your bar in the Zoom, you should see a little button there. If you type in the questions there, you can view questions that have been asked. You can also submit your own questions. When we get to the Q&A portion, we'll work through as many questions as we can. We have about 90 minutes, I believe, for questions, so we'll work through them in sequential order. There will also be an option for those that would like to verbally ask a question to raise your hand, and we'll unmute you so that you can ask your question. If something does pop up during the presentation and you don't want it to slip out of your head, the Q&A tool is great. It lets you type it out, and we will have those ready to go as soon as we get to that portion. And again, we'll bring up this slide with details on how to participate in the Q&A portion again when we get there, just to remind everybody. Next slide, please. So want to take a moment to start with a land acknowledgement here before we get underway. Um, we want to acknowledge and give thanks to the land on which we live and work, and to the people who have cared for it. This land is the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. As a visitor on this land, we want to recognize how incredibly grateful we are to be here, and to thank these nations for their continued care and stewardship over the land. We believe we have a responsibility to not only acknowledge the grounds on which we are privileged to live, work, and play, but to continue to grow our learning of Indigenous histories and realities. We acknowledge that these nations have lived in harmony with the land, learning integrated processes and that form the foundation of sustainability. And we seek to incorporate aspects of this knowledge into the natural heritage study to help protect and conserve the natural environment. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Heather Ireland from North South Environmental, who will lead us through the bulk of the presentation. Heather?
Thank you, Autumn, and thank you for everyone who is attending this evening. Again, this is the City of Kingston's Natural Heritage Study. It's open house number 2. My name is Heather Ireland. I'm the Senior Natural Heritage Planner with North South Environmental. Our firm was engaged by the City of Kingston to develop the Natural Heritage Study as part of the city's official plan review. So the Natural Heritage Study was prepared, as I mentioned in the previous slide, as part of the city's official plan review to guide policy and mapping for the city's natural heritage system. It is guided by the 2024 Provincial Planning Statement, or PPS for short, which emphasizes protecting the natural environment and maintaining biodiversity while having consideration for other land uses. The PPS allows municipalities to go beyond minimum standards where it is appropriate. Appended to the draft natural heritage study is the draft technical report that supports the draft mapping through a review of relevant policies, best practices, and trends. This was the subject of consultation this past summer in 2025. The draft natural heritage study does not include draft policies, so please keep that in mind this evening. Instead, it provides considerations, tools, and guidance based on consultation input, best practices, and provincial direction and standards. The city may select from these to shape its approach while balancing broader planning priorities with the implementation happening through the official plan and other municipal tools. So the project really began in February 2025 with community workshops with Indigenous development and agricultural communities, as well as environmental interest groups. Followed by a summer engagement period, as I mentioned earlier, that presented the draft Natural Heritage System mapping and the draft technical report. Any input received through these consultation engagements helped refine the natural heritage system and inform policy considerations. We are now into phase 3 of the project, and this is where we're presenting the draft natural heritage study with updated draft natural heritage mapping. This includes the updated mapping actually includes any technical revisions or site-specific requests that came through consultation. So feedback gathered this evening and through the broader Natural Heritage Study consultation will help guide any final changes before the report goes to Planning Committee this spring. So I just want to highlight that today we're really here to focus our feedback on focusing on the feedback that we've received throughout the project and highlighting any changes since our last update and since we last met in the summer, and really to help guide and move natural heritage policy considerations forward through this process. So a little bit more details about the summer 2025 consultation that had occurred. The city carried out a broader consultation from July 3rd to August 6th, August 6, 2025, on the draft technical report, draft natural heritage mapping, and also received any comments, ideas, or inputs for considerations around policy recommendations. We received approximately 268 submissions across multiple platforms representing a wide range of perspectives, including public landowners, environmental groups, the development community, local Indigenous communities, and we also consulted with the CRCA on some of the study materials. So based on the consultation feedback, we identified several key policy theme areas. These really focused, those areas that we've highlighted really focused on protecting wetlands and woodlands, improving habitat connectivity, strengthening environmental study requirements, and really promoting enhancement and stewardship to support biodiversity and ecological health. So the intention tonight is to walk through these thematic policy considerations that were really driven from what we heard from the public and other interested parties. Again, please keep in mind that there are additional recommendations or considerations throughout the study itself, and I recommend you do a complete read through of that study. So to focus on wetland protection. So really tonight, I'll highlight, where we are, what we've heard from the public, and how it really informed the policy considerations. So starting off, as I mentioned, with wetlands, the city's current policies protect both significant and locally significant wetlands, but the criteria for locally significant wetlands were limited, and the mapping is outdated. There was also little guidance on monitoring wetland health or supporting wetland restoration. What we heard through community input was that it was highlighted that there is a need to protect all types of wetlands with a commitment to no net loss. It's important to also recognize wetlands from their ecological, cultural, and local significance, and to integrate Indigenous and local knowledge to better understand wetland functions, track losses, and identify restoration opportunities. Stemming from the feedback that we heard, and again through best practices and standards, key considerations have been included in the natural heritage study and recommendations around continuing the protections for significant coastal wetlands as well as significant wetlands, and maintaining policies for important locally significant wetlands. We have now adapted a new term, locally important wetlands. It's the same wetland areas, it's just the term has been updated. And also to mention that in growth areas and industrial protected areas, we have identified there may be an alternative approach to supporting development while still preserving wetlands. Also, since the last consultation in June, the criteria for locally important wetlands has been updated and clarified to focus on ecological functions, hydrological connections, and habitat value, and the mapping has been updated accordingly. And then a new category of other wetlands was also introduced, which includes unevaluated wetlands that are identified by size and connectivity. We again continue to recommend the city work with the CRCA to avoid impacts on regulated wetlands, as well as support restoration and enhancement of those areas. The study also has recommended the use of environmental impact studies to support restoration, monitoring, and adaptive management, along with the use of infrastructure like along with the use of green infrastructure like vegetated buffers and bioswales to support wetland health and biodiversity. And then finally, it was recommended that we continue to look to update wetland mapping and to do so through ongoing collaboration with the Conservation Authority to help track changes and identify targeted restoration and opportunities over time. Woodland protection was another area that we heard a lot about through public engagement. So the city's current official plan protects significant woodlands in alignment with provincial policy and direction. But the criteria for contributory woodlands, which was another area mapped and identified in the city's current official plan, was very unclear, and the protections were mostly around encouragement rather than a requirement. The current plan also includes a 30% forest cover target based on Environment Canada's How Much Habitat is Enough to guide overall woodland coverage within the city. So through community engagement, we heard that all trees and woodlands should be prioritized for preservation, including small green spaces, hedgerows, or shrubs. Respondents also emphasized that the ecology and social benefits of woodlands, from biodiversity to carbon storage to pollinator support, was very important, and and also highlighted the need to track both negative and cumulative impacts on development. Pardon me. So to address this, the Natural Heritage study put forward some key considerations, including maintaining the city's current 30% forest cover target in order to continue to see woodland canopy continue to grow and continue the protection of significant woodlands. It did provide updated criteria are proposed for the contributory woodlands, and that is found within the technical report, and identify that these areas of contributory woodlands should be protected and subject to no negative impact. Again, it has been mentioned that in special growth areas and protected industrial areas, the city may need to identify an alternative approach to consider development while having woodland preservation. The study also recommends that additional guidance is provided to clarify how negative impact is applied and should be considered, including when tree removal is permitted, but may require replacement or ecological offsetting. Potential woodland enhancement areas, which is new to the city, have been identified in the study and associated mapping. Now, these were formerly known as other trade areas this past summer in 2025 in the previous draft mapping. These areas have now been moved over to identify and have encouragement policies around conservation and natural expansion over time, with the hope that eventually these areas would become significant woodlands or contributory woodlands through restoration and enhancement efforts. And then finally, of course, always need to have consideration and coordination with the forest management strategy, especially to help monitor woodland cover and track cumulative impacts to woodlands over time. So another area of importance that was highlighted through the many comments that we received was around linkages and corridors. So the city's current official plan recognizes and protects linkages and corridors in line with the provincial planning statement. But mapping has been very limited, and policies provided really only provided basic guidance for site-specific planning. Based on community feedback, there was emphasis on the importance of protecting ecological corridors using a system-based approach. Respondents really highlighted the need to reduce wildlife mortality and support their movement across the landscape, as well as ensuring connectivity is considered when assessing development impacts. The study took that information forward and had identified landscape linkages, which had been shown in our draft mapping, and with policy considerations around design and location of those landscape linkages. And then it also goes on to identify that through environmental impact studies, it can help identify additional site-specific connections when more data and information is available. Policy considerations, as I mentioned earlier, also highlighted the need and a discussion around the design of linkages, specifically to maintain and enhance the areas to support turtles, amphibians, and other wildlife, as well as to help reduce mortality and strengthen the overall ecological functions of the system and the features within. Policy considerations also included an encouragement around engagement and integration of Indigenous knowledge to be incorporated into the design of linkages, including the use of culturally significant, locally appropriate native species. And of course, if there's opportunities to include measures such as wildlife tunnels, habitat restoration, or road mitigation during major projects, ultimately supported by monitoring to make sure those efforts are being maintained. And then finally, policy considerations were also included in the Natural Heritage Study around efforts for municipal stewardship programs, landowner engagement, again, as I mentioned, Indigenous collaboration, and restoration and consideration for restoration of shoreline, riparian, and upland areas can ultimately further strengthen connectivity and improve the long-term health and resilience of the city's natural heritage system. Another area that we heard and I mentioned earlier was environmental impact studies and the idea of strengthening those studies and the guidance and the direction around those. So again, where we were is the city's official plan currently requires environmental impact studies, or EISs for short, when development and site alterations are proposed within or adjacent to natural heritage features and areas, but the guidance currently is outdated and is based on some previous CRCA standards. There is limited direction for consistent evaluation, particularly around cumulative impacts, adjacent lands, and the interpretation of negative impacts and how the city views these studies. So through community engagement, we have heard a clear need for stronger guidance for both EIS preparation and municipal review. This includes ensuring studies fully assess impacts on natural features and ecological functions, especially looking at cumulative effects of development on the natural area, and that these decisions are transparent and accountable. There was also emphasis on better protection of adjacent lands to support wildlife movement and habitat connectivity. In response, the draft Natural Heritage Study recommends updating the city's EIS guidelines. This would give practitioners a clear understanding of study requirements and the expectations of the city. It will also allow to standardize field methods and clarify how significance is determined and analyzed, as well as looking at impacts, including cumulative impacts and how they are assessed. The study also identified adjacent lands lists that trigger studies to be completed consistent with provincial guidance, while recognizing the need for flexibility for existing development or looking at sensitive species and habitats where warranted. The study also highlights that the guidelines would also need to allow for a scoped approach so that all development require a full EIS depending on the site and project context. Right? For example, looking at existing development or existing residential development where somebody may want to put in a shed versus, a broader commercial development going in. So in general, updating the guidelines would support consistent and efficient and ecologically sound decision making while allowing flexibility for site-specific conditions and mitigation measures such as buffers, linkages, uh, enhancements, and native plantings. The final area that I wanted to highlight this evening was around enhancement and stewardship. So the city's official plan currently encourages restoration and stewardship of natural areas and recognizes private landowner contributions, but guidance is very limited on the specific opportunities. Through community feedback, it was highlighted that there is a clear need for direction, including integration of Indigenous knowledge, supporting ecological function beyond formal natural heritage areas, and improving riparian zones, wetlands, forests, as well as invasive species management within the city. The study does have a section that discusses enhancement and stewardship, and it identifies that the policies that are currently in the official plan should continue as encouragement for enhancement and restoration. But it also highlights that we have identified these areas of potential woodland enhancement areas, which I've mentioned in the woodland section, where there should be targeted enhancement and restoration of those woodlands or those, treat areas. The study also identifies and maps biodiversity supportive areas. These are voluntary lands, so a landowner may elect to have their lands identified as biodiversity supportive areas. These areas are not part of the natural heritage system, but they do contribute to the ecological function by providing native species, education, and restoration opportunities, and are really should be recognized in policy as it supports their stewardship and enhancement efforts. The study further recommends that there are opportunities to locate enhancement areas, guide restoration, and identify connectivity improvements through site-specific and broader study with guidance provided by the city. So it is recommended that this is looked at in opportunities such as EISs or sub-watershed studies. The study also includes consideration for policies within the official plan around encouraging regenerative design. Again, mentioned a few times this evening, use of native plantings, and again, incorporation of Indigenous knowledge around restoration. The study includes policy considerations as well to support voluntary participation from landowners, community groups, and conservation partners while supporting broader education, again, mentioned invasive species management, and identifies opportunities for stewardship and restoration beyond land use planning. So I also wanted to highlight a few other policy areas that really were beyond the main themes that I discussed over the last few minutes. So we did hear back a lot about the city and having an opportunity to some sort of formal monitoring system. So there is a recommendation within the report for the city to consider a formal monitoring system with support from the Conservation Authority, CRCA, to track natural heritage system boundaries through changes made or updates made through sub-watershed studies, environmental impact studies, or even environmental assessments. Ongoing monitoring can evaluate progress towards the natural heritage objectives identified in the city official plan with recommendation for results to be reported back regularly to hopefully guide in future policy and mapping and align with provincial priorities. Another area that we heard back about a lot was the protection for species and their habitat. So the protection for significant wildlife habitat, there is policy considerations around ensuring to account for species types, including amphibians and turtles, with screening guidance to support its implementation through significant identification of significant wildlife habitat. Again, the screening would be as a result of limited mapping currently available and may be determined through environmental impact studies or subwatershed studies. Measures should really reflect the ecological sensitivity of those habitats to ensure long-term sustainability. We did hear back a bit about stewardship in the agricultural areas. So there are some policy considerations around recognizing, again, that agriculture is complementary to the natural heritage system, highlighting that, the stewardship role of farmers and supporting best management practices such as vegetated riparian areas or tree cover, or even looking at hedgerow retention. Restoration enhancement on productive agricultural lands can also help further strengthen the ecological function and connectivity of the natural heritage system. And then finally, we did receive some comments around ecological buffers. These, again, are recommended in the natural heritage study. These are self-sustaining vegetated areas adjacent to natural heritage features. These buffers ultimately are protecting the ecological and hydrological function of natural heritage features. The study does provide options for implementing buffers, including minimum widths or site-specific refinements based on findings of an environmental impact study. Buffers can be adjusted in areas of existing development, as you have to recognize that, while still providing for restoration plantings, as these are encouraged to enhance ecological function and connectivity. How further development or site alteration should generally be restricted within buffers. This is a recommendation made through the study, unless it's been demonstrated that the encroachment will have no negative impact to the no negative impact, and the buffer will continue to provide the ecological function and mitigation it was intended to support the natural features. So moving on to ecological offsetting. We heard back many in the community emphasize the importance of supporting key habitats like wetlands, forests, riparian areas, and headwaters. But there was also very much concern around ecological offsetting, which is mentioned within the natural heritage study. It was generally not supported and can be often viewed as difficult to implement effectively. Again, the term ecological offsetting really can be misleading or considered a bad term in natural heritage planning, because it really suggests that nature can simply be replaced. However, the study does emphasize that if the city does pursue offsetting, it should only be considered as a last option. After all, avoidance, protection, and restoration measures have been applied in the instance of looking at development. Any offsetting must really follow a clear framework and really aim to achieve a net environmental gain, ensuring ecological function, connectivity, and resilience are being maintained and improved. It should be very structured, clear process with direct criteria. So should ecological offsetting be looked at, this approach really should follow the mitigation hierarchy. Again, this is a standard practice for reviewing impacts associated with development and site alteration. It's just a high-level overview of the mitigation hierarchy is, first efforts must be made to avoid impacts. If avoidance is impossible, impacts should be looked at. Impacts should be minimized, then mitigated. Mitigation could be in forms such as buffers. And then only at the last step should offsetting be considered. And it should only be considered, it should not be considered in highly sensitive features like significant wetlands. It should not be considered around significant wetlands or those areas that are ecologically sensitive, consistent with the provincial direction. So this evening, we don't have all the details regarding the standards or criteria for offsetting at this stage, but the study does recommend preparing an ecological offsetting guideline to provide technical standards, processes, uh, and feasibility assessments and monitoring requirements. This will ensure that if offsetting does proceed, it's in a deliberate and enforceable manner, and it delivers measurable net environmental benefits while supporting the city's natural heritage objectives. So I want to take a moment just to go over some of the revisions that have happened to the draft natural heritage system mapping based on comments received in the from the summer 2025 consultation window. So we did receive a total of 76 mapping related comments submitted through the GIS comment portal. And these all have been reviewed. Revisions were made to the mapping to address technical updates and site-specific refinements consistent with the technical report. The Natural Heritage System Mapping portal on Get Involved Kingston that is currently available does show you both the original draft and the final draft mapping of all lands within the city, and this includes the urban boundary expansion applications. So just to highlight quickly the revisions that have occurred. So there has been revisions to some of the significant woodlands mapping. This was manual refinements that were applied to improve mapping accuracy, especially related to hedgerows and rural residential subdivisions. As mentioned earlier, the potential woodland enhancement areas continue to be mapped, but these have evolved from the former other treed areas, which was a component in the initial draft mapping. The mapping was revised to exclude 25 to 34% of the tree cover to be consistent with the definition of forest in the Environment Canada's How Much Habitat is Enough, which allows for consistent monitoring of targets. We also have made some refinements to the locally important wetlands, formerly known as locally significant wetlands. The draft natural heritage study report has included new criteria to identify and map this feature in order to clarify its location on the landscape. The introduction of other wetlands, they're now, unevaluated wetlands are now contained within other wetlands category. And then site-specific refinements. So there were refinements made based on current aerial imagery or previously confirmed boundaries through environmental impact studies. This includes mapping refinements to the urban boundary expansion areas based on the city's review of EISs. So the next slide just provides some examples of what those areas look like where there were potential refinements. Again, this doesn't cover the whole city. It just gives you some examples. So the first image here is showing the removal of other treed areas with less than 35% canopy cover. Again, as mentioned earlier, it was to be consistent with the definition of forest from the How Much Habitat is Enough a guidance document provided by Environment Canada. The next image is showing some refinements of the rural woodland boundary around rural residential areas. These were areas that saw reduction in the hedgerows areas that were less than 40 meters in average width. This again was criteria direction from the Natural Heritage Reference Manual provided by the province. And then finally, updating the wetland designations to locally significant wetlands where there was continuous wetlands that were with significant wetlands or provincially significant wetlands. So these are identified as locally significant now based on the criteria provided in the Natural Heritage Study. So I do want to highlight that there are some comments that were considered, but all could not be implemented. Some comments were outside the project scope. We did receive comments on the the city's tree bylaw, park planning, and infrastructure. These comments were referred to other departments or will be addressed through the broader official plan review. Others comments that we received would set the city's responsibility for holistic and balanced planning out of alignment, such as requiring extensive, large mandatory buffers that are not supported by study or restricting all infrastructure across watercourses or wetlands. And then some suggestions went far beyond policy and were not in line with current and best practices or would contravene other provincial policies. So, for example, full protection of every natural heritage feature or a detailed study of every single property at this point in the official plan review. And then some items, they were not captured in policy, but some items were captured in policy, but couldn't be mapped due to data limitations, like for example, like enhancement areas, riparian zones, and site-specific linkages that really require more site-specific evaluation to be done through an environmental impact study or a subwatershed study at the time of development. To kind of wrap things up, this is, again, completing the natural heritage system study is just the start, and identifying the system and the potential policies. Further work will continue through the recommendations that were made in the report to update the environmental impact study guidelines, look at a new ecological compensation guideline, as well as through zoning, site plan control, and other city initiatives. Again, effective management will require coordinated efforts with the city, adjacent municipalities, CRCA, landowners, the indigenous communities, and really needs alignment with the forest management strategy, natural asset management plan, biodiversity action plan, and of course, watershed planning. Again, this work will continue to evolve as these initiatives continue to move forward and with considerations of some of the recommendations and considerations from the natural heritage study. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Niall to give an update on the second draft of the official plan.
Thanks, Heather. My name is Niall Lodi. I'm a senior planner with the City of Kingston and part of the project team working on the Natural Heritage Study. The draft Natural Heritage Study report provides considerations for the policy and mapping framework to inform the city's natural heritage system within the new official plan. The draft report does not provide specific official plan policies, rather is intended to provide the city with a variety of tools and options to select from to establish the municipal approach to protecting the natural heritage system, which will need to be balanced with other aspects of community planning outlined in the provincial planning statement and the broader growth strategy in the city's new official plan. The second draft of the official plan was released concurrently with the draft natural heritage study and contains draft natural heritage system mapping, which is map 8, and partial natural heritage system policies, which is section 5B, for consultation. The city expects that additional refinements to the natural heritage system policies may be included in the third draft of the official plan as staff consider public feedback received through both documents and the implications of the natural heritage study considerations on the broader official plan growth strategy. Both documents were released at the same time so that the public can review them together, understand how the draft natural study has informed draft policy and mapping in the official plan, and to provide feedback. The consultation session this evening is intended to focus on the mapping and content of the natural heritage study rather than on the second draft of the official plan. We welcome comments on the draft natural heritage study this evening, and the city welcomes comments on the second draft of the official plan by emailing newofficialplan@cityofkingston.ca, using the YG220K official plan project page on Get Involved Kingston, or through one of the forthcoming official plan consultation sessions. Next slide, please. If you have not already done so, the draft Natural Heritage Study report and the revised draft Natural Heritage System mapping can be accessed from the project website at getinvolved.cityofkingston.ca/natural heritage study. Questions, comments, and general feedback can be provided by emailing me at noddie@cityofkingston.ca, and mapping comments can be provided directly within the revised draft Natural Heritage System mapping platform. We are welcoming feedback until April the 21st. Feedback will be considered in determining where revisions or clarifications to the draft materials may be appropriate. I will now pass the presentation back to Autumn.
Thanks, Niall. So this concludes this evening's formal presentation on the Draft Natural Heritage Study Report. We'll now welcome questions, comments, and feedback from the public. And there are two ways to provide your feedback. So the first one, you can provide written feedback, as many of you already have, and we'll get to those questions in the Q&A feature. At the bottom of your, so just use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in your question. The other way you can provide feedback is if you'd like to verbally ask a question or provide a comment, just hit the raise hand button down there. It'll let us know that you're interested and we will get to you in order. When it's your turn, I'll call on you by name and then we'll unmute you. You'll get a little notification to confirm that you'd like to come off mute and then you can ask your question. The project team will respond to both written and verbal questions and comments. All feedback will be summarized by the project team and posted on the project page on Get Involved Kingston. Those links have been shared in the chat, and we'll share any other relevant links or contact information in that chat as well, so you have direct access there. Feedback will be considered by the project team as we work towards finalizing the Natural Heritage Day. So with us tonight, we have Heather Ireland, who's the Senior Natural Heritage Planner with North South Environmental. We also have Tim Park, Director of Planning Services. Matt Wheeler, Project Manager for Ecology at the City of Kingston. Myself, and Niall Odie, Senior Planner, who you just heard from. And before we jump into the questions, I just wanted to address a couple that we did receive and did answer via text. So we had a question about how many people are attending this evening. We have about 35. There's a couple folks that are joining, I think, from multiple devices and appear in our participant list twice. So excluding staff, we have about 35 people here tonight. There's a question about whether this will be recorded so that those who missed it or perhaps you want to go back and revisit a portion. Yes, it is being recorded and we will publish that on the city's YouTube channel and put it on the Natural Heritage Study page. It may take us a day or so to get that uploaded, so please bear with us. Thank you. We also had a question about if currently mapped significant woodlands are raised, will the NHS keep this designation and require reforestation? The response to that question was the current mapping of significant woodlands is one tool that would be used in the assessment of tree removals if an infraction under the tree bylaw occurs. We had another question from Michael who asked, try as I might, I cannot find a stated reason for prioritizing expansion of the urban zone as opposed to increasing density. By example, the city removed policies allowing garage carriage houses, while other cities were approving them as standard. Such protects land coverage, reduces sprawl, all while allowing more density. Not everything has to be clear-cut and built. The response to that was that Section 2.1 of the Provincial Planning Statement 2024 requires municipalities, when preparing a new official plan or updating an existing one, to make sufficient land available to accommodate an appropriate range and mix of land uses for a planning horizon of at least 20 years and not more than 30 years, informed by provincial guidance. Kingston does not currently have enough land within the existing urban boundary to support the projected growth for the next 25 years, hence the need to expand the urban boundary to meet this PPS requirement. So those are the ones we've already addressed. I see one hand raised, but I'm just going to jump into the questions we received through the Q&A tool first, and then we'll get to that one. So the first question we have comes from John, who asks, my question is, we have a lot of area within Kingston's boundary. Much of the area outside the urban boundary has not been mapped for woodlands or wetlands. Is an area provincially significant or other? Is there a plan to map all of it over the coming years?
Back on. Thank you. I'm back on. I just want to make sure that you can hear me and see me.
You're good. Go for it.
Thank you. So currently the draft natural heritage system mapping is the best available data that we have to date. As more data becomes available through environmental impact studies, should watershed planning be done within the City of Kingston, and through other means, mapping can get updated. And that's why we put a recommendation that there should be monitoring done and the mapping should be updated on a frequent basis and reported back. So that was one of the policy considerations provided within the report so that you would have more readily available mapping of these areas over the long term rather than a stagnant mapping that does not have detailed information that has been provided through more site-specific studies.
Thank you, Heather. We have two questions from Robert about EISs. So, why do locally significant wetlands have lower buffers and EIS coverage than provincially significant wetlands? And sort of related, will EIS cover landscapes?
So, Robert, maybe I need a bit of clarification for you, but hopefully I'll answer what you're asking. So the environmental impact studies, they're required when development and site alterations are triggered through a Planning Act application. They're required when development and site alteration are occurring adjacent or within natural heritage features and areas, as well as other components of the natural heritage system. So it doesn't just limited where it needs to be done. It's specific to those natural areas. So why do locally significant wetlands have lower buffers? Buffers are really determined again through various means, specifically around site-specific study. This natural heritage study does provide three options for the city to consider. It did, as I mentioned, identify opportunities to provide minimum buffer standards. It does also identify opportunities to provide a precautionary approach with a standard buffer width that can be refined through further study, or that buffer should be determined when more information is determined on site around the sensitivity of the feature and the adjacent land use that's being proposed. Maybe Niall or Matt, if there's anything else you wanted to add to that.
I don't have anything further to add on that. I think that was a good response, Heather. Thank you.
Fantastic. So next we have a question from Tara who asks, you mentioned regarding recommending bioswales. Are recommendations limited to these bioswales or other low impact development ideas, such as rain gardens, permeable pavers, etc.? Sorry if you mentioned this and I missed it. Niall? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Heather, if you want to take this
No,
first.
no, Niall. Go ahead, Niall.
Sorry, I was going to respond to this during the presentation and I clicked the wrong button. So here I am responding to it live. No, it wouldn't be limited to just bioswales. I think all forms of low impact development helping to improve water quality and improve infiltration, helping to maintain water balance in and around wetlands would be reviewed and potentially implemented and supported. I think that those types of initiatives have benefits, and I don't think we would be limiting ourselves to just bioswales. We'd be looking at all opportunities. Thanks.
Thanks, Niall. We have another question here from Gordon who asks, I'm hearing words when talking about woodlands that include encouragement and hope. Should the study not be more forceful than encouragement and hope when it comes to protecting these woodlands?
Thanks, Autumn, and good question, Gordon. So the Natural Heritage Study does identify that significant woodlands should be protected consistent with provincial direction from the provincial planning statement. That's where any development and site alterations must demonstrate no negative impact on the feature and its ecological functions. With that being said, contributory woodlands are recommendations for the city for policy considerations were around actually advancing contributory woodlands from an encouragement or supportive role to actually incorporating that identifying and incorporating contributory woodlands through site-specific study. They are identified in the mapping, and our recommendations is that should development be identified adjacent or within contributory woodlands, that it must be demonstrated that there is no negative impact to those areas. Again, I did mention that there are some strategic priority growth areas that the city may need to consider an alternative approach, or have further discussion on what contributory woodland protection is in those areas. But we did want to see the advancement, and we did make recommendations in the natural heritage study to that effect. And then the potential tree enhancement areas that have been identified. These areas are areas that do not meet woodland canopy cover standards, or the minimum of 60% cover. So these areas, again, we want to see enhancement and restoration targeted to these areas. And it's great to see that the city has allowed us to identify those through the natural heritage study. And really, we're encouraging that these areas should be integrated where possible through development applications as well too. Again, targeting restoration and stewardship and invasive species management through those areas.
Thank you. So we have a couple questions here from Councillor Lisa Saniak, so I'm just going to work through these one at a time. The first one here is, who's responsible to update the EIS guideline rules?
So it's standard. Should municipality identify EIS guidelines as a requirement within their official plans, it is the municipalities that do maintain and update those based as ways to implement their official plan policies.
And about your point for biodiversity supporting areas, can the city's biodiversity plan, that hasn't been started yet, focus on identifying these areas, or have these areas already been identified? Can you please expand upon this point?
Niall, maybe if you'd like to respond to this.
Yeah. I think that the biodiversity supportive areas, that's something that we can further explore as a municipality as we start to undertake the biodiversity action plan. Certainly through the conversations with North South and the preparation of the draft natural heritage study, the intention for the biodiversity supportive areas was to have it as a fluid supporting component or contributing area to the natural heritage system, not as something that was static. It is intended to be, voluntary, where community groups or property owners are undertaking activities that are supportive of biodiversity or the natural heritage system, that it's a way to recognize those areas. It's a way to help celebrate those initiatives within the community, those learning opportunities, those types of things. So I think that we want to try and identify those areas wherever we can through whatever mechanisms we have as a municipality, but it is intended to be a voluntary celebration of those initiatives, not as a restriction on development.
Thank you. We also have a question about what meeting/month do we hear about the policies that will be put in place? Tim, I think you're going to take that one.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. What we're looking at right now is those policies are still being developed further from the second draft, which has been released, and they will be included in the third draft of the OP, which should be released at some point in May. I don't have the exact date yet, and that would be going to a meeting of council in June.
Thanks for that. We also had a comment about the CRA approving a new policy on ecological offsetting in their development approval group. So thank you for that comment. It's been noted. We have a question from Julia. Did North South consider the provincial government's proposal an amalgamation of Ontario's conservation authorities in this report, and the consequential burden conservation authorities may be burdened with?
Thanks, Autumn. So the provincial government's proposal for amalgamation of Ontario's conservation authorities, the final decision was made after the study had been completed and finalized. From a municipal perspective, I'll have to hand it over to Niall or Matt if they have any response from that standpoint.
I think that the amalgamation of the CAs is something that the municipality is monitoring, and it's a situation where um, it's evolving as new information and new updates and new legislation becomes available from the municipality. So it's something that we're paying attention to, but certainly the indication from that's been released from the province is that municipalities will still have a voice on the boards of CAs, and CAs still have a very important role. And we look forward to continuing to work with CRCA or the organization's name as it becomes amalgamated.
Thank you. We have another question from Lisa, from Councillor Saniak, who asks, "Can you please show us what map shows your recommendation? Can you please show us what map shows your recommendations for the potential woodland enhancement areas?"
So the mapping, my apologies, I don't have the website mapping up. Let me. The mapping for potential woodland enhancement areas is available on the online platform. I don't know if somebody does have it up and we can show it. It also is available through the Natural Heritage Study as well too. Those are the areas.
I think Niall's going to pull it up on his screen.
Thank you, Niall.
Just bear with us for a moment here.
And then the recommendations for potential woodland enhancement areas are within section 6 of the Natural Heritage Study, and it provides some direction around and recommendations around what potential woodland enhancement areas can do in terms of restoration, gearing restoration and enhancement, as well as looking at invasive species management for those areas. So as Niall is showing here, if you are on the story maps through the Get Involved page for the Natural Heritage Study Project, you'll be able to pull up the previous mapping on the left-hand side, and then the new mapping, the new draft mapping on the right-hand side. Keep in mind that the potential woodland enhancement areas in the previous mapping were called other treat areas, and then now they are potential woodland enhancement areas. And thank you, Niall, for selecting those areas and showing us the data.
Thank you. Moving on, we have a question here from Chris who asks, "I'm wondering if the City of Kingston will consider pre-mapped buffers instead of letting them be subject to site-specific environmental impact studies. Guelph, Kitchener, and other Ontario municipalities are moving towards pre-mapped buffers / mandatory minimum buffers." Bear with us. I think the team's just deciding who's best to answer this one. Niall, looks like you're up.
So the Natural Heritage Study provides recommendations on buffers and provides some different options that can be considered. I believe Heather kind of summarized those in the presentation. That's a component that we're interested in feedback from the community as part of consultation on the second draft of the official plan. It's something that we did hear about in the summer consultations and throughout this project as something that some members of the community are interested in seeing done. We as a municipality need to weigh those desires with practical implementation measures, because there's not always a situation where mapped features and the buffers, there could be an intervening road between the feature and a property. And so we need to figure out how to weigh all of those different scenarios. So that is a component that I think the city would welcome feedback and consultation on through the second draft of the official plan.
Thank you. We have a question from Robert who asks, what is an example of a large buffer which was rejected? Is 100 meters too large, for example?
So buffers are typically identified once you know what the sensitivity of the feature is, and what's within the feature, and what the adjacent land use development is. Typical buffers can range that you see from 10 meters to 30 meters. In size, the Natural Heritage Reference Manual does provide some direction on buffer size, again, depending on the sensitivity feature and the adjacent land use requirements. Have I personally seen a 100-meter buffer provided in my career? No, I have not. I've seen less provided. It's usually recommended, I guess, if there is a strong sensitivity to features in that area. I know we have Matt on the line. Maybe he has seen something that size, but I have not.
Hi, thanks, Heather. Yeah, I would echo the same sentiments in that generally 100 meters is not something that's typically seen in terms of buffer width. And like Heather mentioned, in terms of the size of the buffer, it usually is relative to natural heritage features and areas that are present, as well as the proposed land use change in terms of site alteration and development. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. So that's the full list of questions we got to before a different Robert raised his hand. So I'm taking these questions here as they come in. So if we haven't gotten to yours yet, it's just haven't gotten there in the order yet. We'll get there. So Robert, we're going to invite you to unmute yourself and then ask your question.
Hi, Robert McInnes. I'm concerned about a couple of things. One is within the major map of this heritage study, you show in the urban area none of those corridors that you show outside of it, maybe only a couple of very small ones. And I'm wondering, the ones outside of the area are all pale orange, but there are very few within the area. So a bunch of us were looking at the map and wondering, there are several in the urban area. There are several small wetland areas, and they don't show the small streams that connect them, and they don't show the small streams that run into the lake. And I'm wondering why those aren't shown. So my next question is about biodiversity. You have shown one biodiversity zone which is not associated with a wetland. And I'm wondering whether you have plans to contact various people and studies that may have already identified these kinds of areas. iNaturalist, for one, would be a good source, and the Kingston Naturalist Society, they would be a good source. And I know there are two woodland areas, small woodland areas, which are mature within the Kingston boundary, which are too small to be included as significant woodlands. But I'm wondering if they could be designated biodiverse areas, because obviously if they're very mature, they have a lot of biodiversity inside of them. So I wonder if you could answer those two questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I think the team's just taking a moment here, and then we'll dive into a response. Heather?
Thank you, Autumn. Again, as mentioned previously, the Natural Heritage System mapping, the draft Natural Heritage System mapping is done with best available data and information that can be provided at this time. If there is information missing in terms of streams or water courses, those can be identified through site-specific studies or through broader watershed planning, which can ultimately be updated for the mapping at a more frequent basis, as I mentioned, through broader monitoring of the natural heritage system. Again, if something is not mapped on the landscape but is identified through the study, through a future study like an environmental impact study, it doesn't negate that as long as those areas meet the technical requirements provided in the technical report or consistent with provincial direction and guidance, those areas will essentially also need to be protected and adhere to the policies of the city's official plan. In terms of biodiversity zone, those biodiversity supportive areas, those again are specific voluntary areas that are not part of the natural heritage system, but are really looked at because they do offer opportunities for education, stewardship, restoration initiatives, as well as education and communication. And those areas again would be an elective if landowner would like to identify those areas within these biodiversity supportive areas. With that being said, it doesn't negate that anything else, whether wetlands, woodlands have biodiversity. That's not the intention of these areas. Through broader study, looking at, significant wildlife habitat, species at risk, and looking at the woodlands themselves or wetlands themselves, there may be, whether through iNaturalist or through, on the ground studies being done, those areas do offer biodiversity and do provide important ecological functions to the feature and the broader system itself.
Thanks. I'm going to go back to the Q&A questions we received for a moment, and then we'll go back to raised hands. So the first question comes from Vicky, who asks, it would help me to understand where things go next by talking about hedgerows as an example. The 40-meter width of a hedgerow is wide and comes from a provincial document. 1, can the city define a hedgerow as, say, 30 meters wide? 2, if so, would this come as a council direction at this point? And 3, how would a council directive on this affect the North-South document? In other words, is this possible or already wrapped in? Just taking a moment to mull this. Niall?
You're correct. The 40-meter width on hedgerows does come from a provincial document, and we did that on purpose. We have tried to ensure that the mapping criteria and methodologies used in the natural heritage study are based as much as possible on provincial methodologies, provincial documents, so that the methodologies and findings can be as strong as possible. When municipalities start introducing their own methodologies that aren't supported at the provincial level or supported by best practices, that's when debate on mapping the validity of the findings really starts to ramp up. And so significant woodlands and woodlands in general are very important to the community. We recognized that there was an opportunity to improve the mapping and to try and improve protection and accuracy and clarity around what a significant woodland is, where it's located, and how it was mapped. And so we purposefully selected the 40-meter width of the hedgerow in line with the provincial natural heritage reference manual. Can the city define it, say, as 30 meters? As I mentioned, the city, as we're working through methodologies, we could have picked different criterias, but for the reasons that I highlighted previously, we used the provincial guidance there. In terms of how would this come as a provincial or as a council direction at this point, and how would a council directive on this affect the north-south document. Perhaps I can pass this over to Director Tim Park for further.
My apologies for the delay there. I was just in the middle of reading another question when it got referred to me. So certainly when the recommendations within the third draft of the official plan come forward and that the policy, if it's 40 meters, is in there, council certainly has the ability to make a motion to enlarge that, I guess, buffer. It's being supported right now by the north-south study. So it's, I think, going to be, we may get questions on, is there support to make it larger? Can we justify that? And right now we don't have that, so we wouldn't be able to answer from a professional input on that. But the ability to make that motion is always available. Whether that motion carries through or not, I can't speak to that.
Thank you, everybody. We have a question from Sandra asking about whether the slides will be posted and shared. I just want to reconfirm that we are recording tonight's session, and the slideshow will be available online through that. So again, bear with us, give us to the end of the week to get it posted, and it'll be up there. We have a question from P. Rubens who asks, with the changes in the second draft, we know that wetlands and forests do not simply end at the city's municipal boundary. What protections does the NHS offer the municipality for ecologically sensitive areas that extend into the adjacent counties of Lennox and Addington and Lanark counties? Niall's going to take this.
Hi, Peter. I think we've had previous correspondence on this topic, and the surrounding areas outside the city of Kingston are not affected by the protections or considerations with the natural heritage system. The mapping ends at the city of Kingston boundary. The recommendations for official plans or municipal initiatives are for the city of Kingston only. They don't compel property owners outside the city of Kingston. They don't compel adjacent municipalities to any of those recommendations. Certainly natural heritage systems and features, linkages, corridors, these types of things, they don't end at the municipal boundary, and so there should be some coordination and integration within those systems. But the recommendations within the City of Kingston's natural heritage system doesn't have any protections or limitations on property owners outside the City of Kingston.
Thank you, Niall. Going to a question from Sandra who asks, if draft policies are not included in the current NHS draft, where and when will they be posted?
So the natural heritage study report is in a draft format right now, and we are actively consulting with the community seeking feedback. If there are gaps or omissions that you as a community member feel should be closed, or you have comments and feedbacks, that's what we're doing here. We are asking for comment and feedback from the community on the report. We are welcoming that feedback until April the 21st. So please do, if you have comments on things that are missing, then please bring that to our attention. We would be happy to give that consideration and potentially make modifications into the final natural heritage study report, which will be brought forward in a final format later this spring. Thank you.
Thanks, Niall. And a quick reminder that we do have the links to provide that feedback in the chat. And Heather's also pulled it up on the screen there. So thank you for that. I got two more questions in the Q&A, and then I'll throw it over to another verbal question. So first, James asks, is this a net ecologically regenerative shift away from our current net extractive systems? Just bear with us a moment while we work out who's going to respond. It looks like Niall's up.
I am going to ask James if perhaps he could provide a little bit more um, information, description on that question or the comment, and then we can have a discussion. Thanks.
James, if you want to go and add extra detail into the Q&A, we can jump back to your question. If you prefer to speak to it, feel free to hit the raise hand button and we'll unmute you. I'm just going to move on to another question while you decide how you want to proceed with that. Oh, looks like you've raised your hand. Okay, we'll unmute you. Go ahead, James. Hello, James. We have you unmuted. You're welcome to provide more context for your question if you'd like. No, I'm not able to hear you, James. Sorry. You are unmuted, but it looks like nothing's coming through. Okay.
James, if you want to type it in, that would be that'd be great. Or if you'd like to give me a call tomorrow or later this week to have a discussion around that comment, I'd be more than happy to speak with you. I think we've had some correspondence in the past, so you should have my email, and let me know. Thank you.
That email is also listed in the chat.
Not able to hear me yet?
Oh, no, we can hear you now.
There we go. Okay. I'm sorry for any confusion if it's
No,
on my part.
that's
So
great. Thank you.
I just want to say, thanks for everybody for participating tonight. There's a bit of a delay, so I'm getting the feedback. Okay, got it. Yeah, I'm mindful of the International Ecological Footprint Learning Labs annual report. And just you can go under Earth Overshoot if you want to take a look at it. And it basically says that we're using, as of last year, about 1.8 planets per year to keep pace with our extraction. And I'm wondering if there at least is an exercise that is more planet-centric and takes into account, as Mr. Rubin said, the bioregion and the watersheds, irregardless of what the boundaries happen to be, municipal, private, etc. Does that help you?
I think it helps a little bit. You know, I think what we don't have the same, like we don't have that level of analysis to be able to determine, like how many Earths are being used in these types of things. And I think I was having a bit of an audio issue, so I'm not sure that I heard all of it perfectly clearly, but I think there was a reference to Mr. Rubin's question about or comment about municipal jurisdictions and these types of things. Municipalities with their natural heritage studies, their natural heritage systems, and their associated policies and approaches, they need to develop their own. There's common frameworks, provincial guidance, and certainly minimum requirements. that need to be kept in mind, but municipalities do have flexibility to establish their own approaches. Certainly within, the provincial planning statement, there's direction around, significant woodlands and significant wetlands and water courses and hydrology and these types of things. So there's a common starting point, but there is going to be some municipal differences. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not there, but I was having a bit of audio issues. So if you've got further questions.
I think you've answered it, Neil. And yeah, I'd love to have a chat with you. So I'll give a call.
That'd be great. That'd be great. You've got my contact information, so I look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks. I got one more in the Q&A, and then we'll hop over to a couple of live questions. So the first one comes from Sandra. Can you clarify the role of the buffer?
Thanks, Autumn, for reading that. And thanks, Sandra, for your question. So a buffer is really a form of a mitigation tool that is widely accepted across the industry as one of the most effective ways to avoid negative impact to natural heritage features and areas and their ecological functions when development is being proposed or site alterations adjacent to. Buffers are naturally vegetated areas of land, again, as mentioned, adjacent to the natural features, and they're usually bordering lands that are subject to development or site alterations. So these are the areas that you are defined either through a natural heritage study or once more information about the feature itself is known and the sensitivity of that feature and the opportunity to use that to mitigate impacts to those areas.
Thanks, Heather. We have two questions that came in through the raised hand, then I'm going to go back to the Q&A and then back to the raised hand. So first one, Robert McInnes, I believe you'd had a question there. You're ready to go?
Hi, I asked earlier about the orange corridors on the map. They're pale orange corridors. There are very few of them shown within the urban boundary. So we know that we have the K&P Trail and the Rideau Trail. Are those not similar kinds of corridors that you're looking for? What is the definition of these corridors? How did you come about where these corridors would be on your map? They just seem to be a little bit random. So I'm wondering if you could explain that.
Thank you for your clarification and your comment again. So those areas are identified as landscape scale linkages. These areas focus on ecological linkages that provide wildlife movement between natural features and areas. Again, the landscape scale linkages were done through a specific methodology that was identified in the technical report that is identified or that is provided and appended to the Natural Heritage Study. There is a link to the technical report on Get Involved. But essentially, it was done through a GIS analysis that looked at areas where there was least resistance for wildlife movement that typically followed, watercourse corridors as one of the criteria that we've identified. And there's various other criteria that is mentioned in that report. So those areas, again, are only landscape scale linkages based on the information that we currently have available. With that being said, there is opportunity to identify site-specific linkages through further study being done once we have more information about certain features and areas that we currently don't have at this stage. And the technical report, as well as the Natural Heritage Study itself, provides direction on how to identify those site-specific linkages, what are the criteria that need to be met, and should be analyzed and assessed through the environmental impact study, and then mapping updated accordingly. Again, there's recommendations. Again, it's focused around ecological linkages and corridors, not just simply corridors around trails and walking paths in those areas.
Thank you, Heather. We have another hand up, Councillor Lisa Sadiak.
Thank you. My question just goes back to the EIS guidelines, and I think I heard that it's all part of the official plan updates. So does that mean, staff, that you need a motion by council to say, please update the EIS guidelines, or is this going to happen without a council motion?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Osanek. So when the policies come forward for in the final version of the official plan, that is one of the things that would be identified, is the updating of those policies. So no motion would be required from council. That's what I'm saying. Our intent is to have that recommendation that they be developed.
Oh, sorry, can I just go one more thing? I do find the mapping difficult, but I haven't had a long time to play with it, and I might ask the assistance of my kids to help me with the mapping. But in relation to the clear cutting that has just happened in the West End, I don't know if the mapping and the natural heritage study still shows the woodland existing, but when we get to the final draft of it, would that GIS image be updated to reflect reality whenever the aerial photographs are available?
So, Councillor, at this time, I'm going to have to say that that cutting that you're referring to is currently under investigation by the city. So I'm not in a position to be able to comment on how that's going to proceed one way or the other at this point in time.
Oh, sorry. I just meant the aerial maps. Like if it shows aerial maps in the study and showing it all as green, because that would probably be taken in 2025, would those maps then just be current to show how it looks right now from an aerial image? Only when we get to the final version, if the aerial photographs are available at that time at Google Earth or whatever source this study uses.
So I can't commit that the mapping would be updated by that point in time, but as you heard earlier in the presentation, the intent is, and that's one of the differences between this current version of the natural heritage features and the existing ones in the official plan, is we will have the ability to update those annually, and that's what we are going to do. So whenever we get a development application that has a EIS attached to it, that's really a ground truthing of that base mapping that North-South has done. And in some cases, things will be expanded. In other cases, they may be reduced depending on what's found on the ground, because remember, this is just very high level. So at some point in time, if there has been a large removal of significant woodlands that were previously indicated as that, and then obviously we're aware of that, the mapping would be updated.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to go back to the Q&A for a moment, and then we'll go to some hands. So Paul asked a follow-up but his earlier question regarding boundaries. So protections would be the purview of the CRCA?
The CRCA has a very specific mandate around watercourses and wetlands, the regulation of natural hazards. Their regulation and their mandate, their purview is separate from the natural heritage study. Perhaps I'm not understanding entirely what the question is, but if the question is related to, regulations and restrictions to, cutting trees within a woodland or altering water courses or development within a valley land, those types of things, CRCA regulations would apply to the features that they apply to water courses and wetlands and regulations. But the municipal approaches to natural heritage protection would be governed by the municipality that it is located within. The City of Kingston Natural Heritage Study relates to lands only within the City of Kingston.
Thank you, Niall. I'm going to throw it over to a couple of hands that have been up for, patiently waiting, and then we'll come back to the Q&A for a little bit. So, Annette, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question. Hello, Annette. If you'd like to ask your question, you're welcome to now. Just checking to see if you're still there, Annette. I'll give you a little bit more if otherwise we might move on. I can come back to you if you're there, but okay. I'll come back to you if you'd like. Oh, okay. Thank you. Carrie Jill also had raised their hand. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm unmuted now. I guess I am.
Yep, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. I have a more general question. So it's not specifically about the clear cut that took place in the West End. But in the current NHS, there are significant woodlands designated. If they are clear cut by the landowner, sometime, say from this moment onwards, will they be considered significant woodland when they might bring a development application forward? So this is just general, as not about that clear cut that took place.
Okay, so I think in terms of a general statement moving forward, and I thought I had responded to this earlier, the base mapping, if it's showing significant woodlands there, that is one of the tools that we have available to us to indicate the property had significant woodlands on them.
Yeah.
So that is one of the things, if cutting took place on a property, we would rely upon to determine if it was significant woodlands or not. Part of the problem we have with the current mapping is it's based on 2006 and it was never updated. And a lot of the time when we've gone out to a property, the lines no longer represent what was originally mapped back in 2006. Our sort of constant updating of the mapping will allow us to do that. So it will help as a tool to assess cutting of trees, but it's only one tool that will be in our toolbox to assess those in the future.
Okay, I'm not asking about the current NHS. I'm asking about the draft, the mapping that we have now that shows significant woodland areas throughout the municipality. If any of those are clear cut and the owner comes forward with a development application, will that area that he clear cut or she clear cut, will that area be considered significant woodland?
If it's currently indicated as significant woodland in the mapping and that mapping is adopted, yes, it would be considered significant woodland. However, as I'm sure you're aware, there was a motion passed to council last night that will no longer allow that type of clear cutting to happen. Anything over 0.2 hectares, currently, there's a temporary bylaw that prohibits it.
Yes, I understand that, and I saw that meeting, and I'm just wondering how many landowners actually know that now.
Well, I'm just going to say, Annette, we're here to talk about the Natural Heritage Policy report, and really the tree bylaw is a separate issue from this right now. It is intertwined, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
Okay, thanks.
Annette, I see you've been trying to speak unmuted on your end. We'll unmute you and you can ask your question now. Go ahead, Annette, you're unmuted. Hello, Annette?
Seems we're having some audio issues connecting Annette. I think we've had some correspondence in the past as well. I'd be happy to receive, give me a call, or we can set a meeting to discuss your comments, or you can put them in the chat, whatever works for you. My contact info, I'm sure will be put back up on the screen if you can't find it.
She's added it into the Q&A. I'll just read that out. So I'll try this by text. I want to address the concept of significant in terms of both wildlife corridors and water management in the era of climate extremes in a water-rich urban area. Presentation at the local land conservancy revealed new information about wildlife corridors effectively working on very small patches of land.
Perhaps if there is a copy of that presentation or some additional literature or documentation that you could provide over to the project team, we'd be happy to take a look at that and give it some consideration. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll reiterate again that the contact info is in the chat there. So you can email that to Niall. It's noddie@cityofkingston.ca. Okay, so we'll do one more raised hand and then I'll go back to the written questions here. Sandra.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Excellent. This question is for Tim. Tim, I just heard you replying that you're going to update the mapping by ground truthing it using the environmental impact assessments or studies. Will this mean that the city ecologists that Matt will not be doing the ground truthing itself after the application with the IASs are when they are submitted?
So yeah, good evening, Sandra. So what the process is when there is a development application that is submitted that has natural heritage features on it that would trigger an environmental impact assessment or environmental impact statement, the applicant is required to undertake a study to document those. They submit it as part of their application. Matt's job here at the city is, first of all, to review that report. And if he, in reviewing the mapping that we have from the natural heritage study and his review of that EIS, if he has some questions that are still requiring further clarification around that, that's when he connects with the ecologist that submitted that report on behalf of the land applicant. And then that typically does involve doing ground truthing, walking the site with the ecologists that undertook the report, and then they work through it to either add, delete, and anything that's under disagreement that they can't agree upon reverts back to the natural heritage mapping that's in place. This is what was done for all of the urban boundary expansion lands recently.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. We go to another question from a different Sandra who asks, is Collins Creek listed as a corridor? Heather's going to take this one.
Thank you. Sorry. I pressed the button and everything popped up on my screen, so Needed to see Autumn's face. So Collins Creek has been identified as a variety of features, including significant valley lands. There is wetlands, woodlands, obviously the watercourse itself. It would have wildlife movement throughout that area, but it has not been identified as a landscape scale linkage, only because landscape scale linkages itself have been identified outside of the natural heritage features and areas. So you see that orange hatched area. It does not negate that it isn't a corridor. If you're looking at the mapping, the orange hatched mapping, there is obviously this is a key corridor within the city, and does provide for wildlife movement through that area. It's just that you will see the natural heritage system features mapped in that area. But again, like I said, it doesn't negate that it is an important ecological corridor for that area.
Thank you. I'm going now to a question from James, who asks, is there any effort to move to a coordinated, holistic, bioregional/watershed plan from a planet's point of view, regardless of jurisdictions and ownerships?
At this point, the natural heritage study was focused on the City of Kingston lands, not a bioregional scope and scale. So what we're working on right now is City of Kingston. In terms of watershed plans, the City of Kingston will be undertaking sub-watershed studies in the near future, in the coming couple of years, as part of additional work required under the provincial planning statement. The scope, scale, and location of those sub-watershed studies, I don't think has been set right now by the municipality, but I believe we'll be coordinating with CRCA on those studies. But in terms of regional, the natural heritage study is focused on the City of Kingston. Thank you.
Thanks, Niall. Annette had a follow-up, I think, I'm wondering if we can address, asking how will these be protected throughout both plans, and also adds she'll locate the presentation and send it on. Thank you, Annette.
Sorry, Annette, can we get a little bit more clarification on how will these be, or what the question was? It's disappeared from here.
How will these be protected throughout both plans? The wildlife corridors and water management.
How will wildlife corridors and watershed management be protected through both plans, the natural heritage study and the sub-watershed studies? Is that the reference here? Natural heritage study is providing a whole series of recommendations for consideration within the official plan. So the consideration of linkages and corridors, there's the draft policies being developed in the second draft of the official plan. We're recognizing through the natural heritage study that linkages between features and across our landscape are incredibly important, and we're trying to raise more awareness to that through the natural heritage study with the mapping of it, and trying to bring in some policy recommendations around incorporating those linkages both at the landscape scale and site-specific scales into development applications. As for the question around sub-watershed studies, that work hasn't been undertaken yet, so it would be premature for me to speak any further on that.
Thanks, Niall. Annette, if you have any further details, please throw them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to address them. I'm going now to a question from Paul. So therefore, if the municipality found an aspect outside the NHS/municipal boundary that might have a detrimental impact on NHS identified features, where does the city turn? bear with us a moment. I think they're just conferencing to decide how best to answer this question.
I think that you've got a number of really interesting comments. I think it's Paul. And I think that we would really benefit from having a conversation. I'm not sure that I'm getting all of the context around the comments, but if the municipality found an aspect outside the NHS and municipal boundary that might have a detrimental impact on the NHS features, where does the city turn? Well, the municipality is circulated on certain development applications within certain radius of the municipality. Within, if an adjacent municipality has a major development application, there are certain notification requirements for the city of Kingston. If there was something that was being proposed that might have a significant impact on a natural heritage feature or a system within the city of Kingston, the city may have an opportunity to participate in providing comments. You know, if there was, I don't know, a quarry or, you know, something that major being proposed, we would receive notification under the Planning Act processes and have an opportunity to provide some thoughts and potentially, you know, have a discussion around mitigation measures.
Thanks for that, Niall. I'm going to go back to a couple of hands that have been waiting patiently over here. So the first one I saw come up was Sandra Jess. So we're going to give you the option to unmute there, or unmute you, and then you can speak.
Hello?
Yep, you're coming through. Go ahead.
Okay, I was concerned about feedback. So it's just a follow-up to my previous comment, because I'm trying to understand, was it Heather, I believe, who spoke? She said, it's listed, I asked the question about Collins Creek. Is it listed as a corridor? And how I understood the response was, it's not listed as a corridor. It's listed as other features, but that doesn't mean it's a corridor. Well, if it's not listed as a corridor, but it doesn't mean it's a corridor, why can't it be listed as a corridor? I guess that was the follow-up.
Thank you, Sandra. And my apologies if my response was ill responded to. In terms of Collins Creek, it doesn't mean that. So when you're looking at the mapping, I guess I'm referencing the mapping directly. It's around that area. If you're looking at the mapping, it's identified as valley lands, wetlands, woodlands, but it doesn't negate that it is not a corridor. It is considered a corridor. It's just the mapping focuses on the lands, the linkage areas between the core areas. That's what you see in orange. It doesn't negate that Collins Creek is not a key corridor. It is a key corridor. It's just when you're looking at the mapping, it is identified as other features. There is a recommendation in the Natural Heritage Study that there is to be a dotted line that runs through the schedules, the land use schedules that do identify that these areas are corridors. It's just the actual, and again, I apologize, I focus directly on the mapping, that the orange areas, the hatched areas are just showing lands that are outside of natural heritage features and areas. Does that answer your question? And maybe Niall can jump in if I'm not clearly articulating.
So I don't know if I'm sure you're being articulate based on the knowledge base you have. And obviously I'm sort of starting from zero trying to understand this. So let me just contextualize. I actually live right on the edge of Mile Square, and I have walked Mile Square Forest extensively. And I know all its natural features. And I know that the deer go up and down the creek and through the forest. And the coyotes and the foxes. So I just have opened the maps myself. I've heard other people state that they're hard to understand. So I'm trying to, so it could be my sort of lack of understanding of how to interpret the maps, but I want to if I, once I understand how to interpret them, come to a realization that you're missing something that I think is important, how do I input that into your process before the closing date so that what I know to be true of the region can be incorporated? That's also my question.
So I'm maybe going to jump in here, Sandra. What I'm going to suggest, I mean, this is part of the input we're looking for back through this meeting tonight, and why our availability to receive comments is open till April 21st. Please submit them in writing. It's something we can certainly revisit. If it's something that we have missed out, then absolutely we can look at incorporating that. But if unless we get that request or identifying things that we have missed, then we can't make the changes. I know over the course of, I think, the last few months, we did receive several requests from property owners to look at certain features that they felt were or weren't included, and we were able to make changes based on that. So I would encourage you to submit that to us in writing, and we'll certainly review it.
Okay, thank you very much. If I need a little help interpreting the map, can I just reach out to ask some questions?
I would welcome a phone call or a meeting with you to chat about this, explain the mapping, whatever works for you. Happy to provide input and help, Sandra.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
And yeah, just to reiterate, that is why there are several weeks open and available for feedback after this. It's a very technical process. We want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to understand, to ask questions, and get some follow-up. Tonight is just one piece of that puzzle. I'm going to go to one more question in the raised hands. I'm also going to point out we've got about 10 minutes left in the allotted time for the evening. So we'll take the remaining questions that we have listed here. If we don't get to any remaining, if we run out of time, we've provided project information in the chat there. We'd welcome questions via email or comments through the engagement process listed on Get Involved Kingston. Okay, Michael, I believe you had your hand up, so welcome you to ask a question.
Thanks, Autumn. Can you hear me all right?
You're coming through 1010.
Great, thank you. I won't take up much time. I know you're getting towards the end. My name is Michael Dakin. I'm a supervisor development review with Cataraqui Conservation. So I guess in a way I'm representing CRCA. I just want to let folks that we know that we are involved very closely with this, and we have a good relationship with city staff. Maybe just a couple themes though that are coming through the comments. I think connectivity is one, and just on the corridors piece from our perspective. Mapping is important. It is important to indicate certain things that may be known internally, but also to portray landscape or watershed-wide connectivity. I think that's maybe the root of the question, the comments about Collins. Collins Creek undoubtedly is one of the, if not the most ecologically sensitive corridors in our area. The mapping currently picks up on the individual features, but we got to remember we're thinking about a system here, and connectivity is really important. So showing that connectivity will go a long way. We operate in a system where, not to slag anyone, but where private sector environmental consultants will speak specifically to mapping, and if a corridor is not shown, they will use that as a rationale to say, well, the corridor is not on the mapping, therefore it's not a corridor. Again, it's obvious to some, it's not to others, so some redundancy there in showing not only the features but the connectivity, the corridors will go a long way. And then just lastly on the beyond municipal boundaries, that's a really important point, I think, that P. Rubens was making. Sorry, I don't know the first name. And Niall certainly spoke to watershed planning. That's the way that it should be done, right? It should be done at the watershed. The city's working within the system that they can do, and we definitely applaud them for that. hopefully the provincial government will allow conservation authorities to continue to work on that watershed level so that we can make sure there's connectivity beyond municipal boundaries, because we know natural heritage features don't follow those. We'll commit to that. We do work with other municipalities, county level natural heritage strategies to make sure that that connectivity is captured. And I just wanted to close by saying we'll continue to advocate for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. The jurisdictional challenges here are not insubstantial. I got two comments and then we'll go to a question. So one was about the work that was referenced earlier, saying Vicky thinks it's a reference to Lenore Fahrig's work at Carleton University, that small wild spaces are important contributors to biodiversity and can be more effective than big blocks. We also have a comment from Annette that small green spaces are important and relate to intensification as well as natural heritage. We have a question here from Vicky. Sorry, I haven't looked at the maps yet. Is Stevenson Creek now recognized as a north-south water course / creek system? And if not, why not?
Is this Steventown Creek in the east end that goes from Joyceville Side Road west to the Rideau River system? Yes, okay. Let me just cruise over there real quick. I believe that it is picked up. Portions of Steventown Creek Complex were identified as locally significant in the existing OP, and I believe we have brought those in. I am seeing in the mapping locally significant wetlands extending most of the way, actually all the way across till it forms a steady water course. Yes. There's only other wetlands along the periphery and contributory woodlands along there too. I think the question was more about north-south route. In my view, it's more of an east-west route, but it is identified as wetlands, watercourses, other wetlands, and contributory woodlands through there.
Thanks, Niall. Another question from Vicky. This one's for Heather. Could you please comment on Valleylands? I might have missed some of the comments. Do you need more context, Heather?
I believe so, Vicky. I didn't hone in on Valleylands through the presentation. I did mention that Collins Creek and there is other major Valleylands throughout the city that have been identified in the mapping. And the mapping has been updated based on best available data and consistent with guidance provided by the province. Those details can be found in the technical report. There hasn't been very many refinements made. I think there was one minor refinement from a site-specific application that was made from the last mapping, but they are consistent from the draft mapping that was sent out for consultation in July and August 2025. I don't know if that answers your question, Vicky.
Please let us know in the Q&A if it didn't. But otherwise, the technical report should be accessible on Get Involved Kingston. A couple of comments from Councillor Saniak. The CRCA did a study about the Collins Creek Wildlife Corridor. They called it a Greenway study in 2005. As well, deer, otters, beavers, coyotes, foxes, fishers cross Bath Road at Collins Creek and also cross Princess Street at Collins Creek and Westbrook up and down the creek. Vicky has provided a few more details. So she asks, what protections provided for valley lands?
So the Natural Heritage Study provides consideration that significant valley land should be protected in accordance with the PPS and the policies from the provincial planning statement, specifically around no negative impact, and should development and site alteration occur adjacent to or within, this should be assessed through a detailed study as part of the environmental impact report that would be done.
Thank you, Heather. I see one more question, and I think we can wrap up after that. Again, reminding everybody that if you have a question that pops into your head after this, this is not the be-all, end-all of this part of the process. We welcome you to reach out. The contact information has been provided in the chat. It's also available on Get Involved Kingston. So going back over to the question, Sandra asks, how does something become determined as provincially significant and regionally significant areas of natural and scientific interest?
So areas of provincially significant, provincially significant areas of natural and scientific interests are identified through the province based on criteria that is set by the province. Regional significant areas of regional significant, it's a lot of talking this evening. Regional significant areas of natural and scientific interest. There is a cleared set criteria by the province as well too. Those areas through further study, if an area meets any of those criteria, which is described through the Natural Heritage Reference Manual, and it also a bit of detail is provided in the technical report. Those areas can be identified as regionally significant. In terms of the draft mapping that's available, there is an opportunity when you click on the ANSIs that it does come up with data. I know Niall showed a version earlier where you could see the potential woodland enhancement areas. So it does identify those areas in the mapping, those areas that are of regionally significance, as well as the names to those areas.
Thank you, Heather. We are at time, so I'm going to close that out for this evening. I just wanted to thank everybody for attending this evening and for your very detailed questions. We really do appreciate it. It will help to make this a much better plan, much better representative of the city's needs and the community's desires. Again, Get Involved Kingston has all of the project information, former reports. It's also got links to related projects such as the official plan, draft 2, which we're also accepting comments on. Thank you again. Have a good night, everybody.